Mars, the red planet, the next frontier of space exploration and inspiration for countless science fiction stories. A different world, yet strangely familiar, with its turquoise sunsets and impressive volcanoes taller than any mountain on Earth. Mars is a place that awakens the spirit of adventure. Too bad we're never going to be there, and I don't mean colonizing it. I mean no one will ever go, not even a small group of humans to plant a flag and return. No one. And I'd bet on it. Manned missions to Mars have been in the plans of NASA, private companies like SpaceX, and even a few scammers, but none of them have real intentions of going. Here, I'll explain why they make people think going to Mars is actually possible, and why we'll never go to Mars. Before I start, let me clarify that I love space exploration. I'm a nerd who's been following space missions closely since childhood, especially those exploring other planets. So believe me, if anyone's disappointed about not going to Mars, it's me. I take no pleasure in telling you this reality, but I'm showing it to you because that's what it is. Reality. And I know it sounds weird. Why wouldn't we go to Mars if we went to the moon for the first time 54 years ago? Or maybe we didn't. No, that's not true. We did go. And we did it with a navigation computer with 4 KB of RAM, basically a potato. Now our technology is much more advanced and it should be relatively easy to reach the red planet, right? We've successfully sent robots to Mars on 25 missions, including car-sized vehicles. Why would it be so difficult to send a couple of humans? Well, because it is, and I'm going to list the reasons. First of all, Mars is far away. The moon, which isn't exactly around the corner, is about 238,000 miles away. Mars, which is on average 143 million miles away, is 600 times farther. It's so far that radio communication can take up to 30 minutes. It would be the most tedious video conference in history, with a 1-hour delay. You can reach the moon in 3 days aboard a powerful rocket, but you'd reach Mars in 7 months, and only if you take advantage of that small 1-month window where, due to its position relative to Earth, the trip is shorter. And that window only opens every 26 months. This vehicle was enough to carry supplies and keep 3 astronauts alive during their round trip to the moon, which lasted between 8 and 12 days. But to store the supplies and resources needed by a crew on a 7-month trip to Mars, they need a much larger ship. It's not the same to spend a week with 2 other people in the minimum space a human can occupy as it is to spend 7 months. During that time, you have to move, you have to exercise, and you'll eat a lot. Nothing in NASA's or SpaceX's current plans is compatible with that. Having the technological capability isn't the only thing needed to go to Mars. It's more important to have a justification, and simply going to take a selfie there to show off that your country was the first to arrive isn't enough. A manned mission to Mars would be, by far, the most expensive in history. And there's nothing on Mars valuable enough to justify spending all that money to go there in person. And it's what you're thinking. The Apollo program to the moon was precisely that, a race to be the first to plant the flag and take a selfie. And it cost $25.001 billion, which, adjusted for inflation, would be $257 billion in today's dollars, equivalent to building and launching 25 James Webb telescopes into space. It was a stupid amount of money, but the selfie and the scientific knowledge of going to the moon in person were just the icing on the cake. In reality, it was a competition to see which superpower could learn faster to build bigger and more precise rockets to send them anywhere. Which made a lot of sense 60 years ago during the Cold War, when superpowers threatened each other with nuclear weapon rockets, but not in the present. If any power decided to spend the necessary resources for a manned mission to Mars, the other powers would say, "Cool, good for you, glad you went." And that's because having robots on Mars that show us the surface and what it's like, there's no reason to send people who need food, air, water, heat, and an atmosphere to protect them from radiation. Equipping a human crew with all these essential resources for long periods is simply unfeasible. Even if we had discovered some incredibly valuable resource on Mars, the sheer cost of transporting it back here would negate its value. Mars, as beautiful and picturesque as it looks in the robot photos, is a pretty miserable tourist destination. The worst vacation of your life. Yes, it looks like a desert like those on Earth, and on Earth, people live in deserts, but no one can live on Mars. During the day on the Martian equator, the temperature can reach 86 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite pleasant, but the minimum temperatures at night can reach minus 220 degrees Fahrenheit. This is because Mars has almost no atmosphere to retain the sun's heat, which in itself is another huge problem. With an atmospheric pressure of 0.6% of what we have on Earth, if you leave your pressurized ship or take off your helmet, this happens to you. No, just kidding. That wouldn't happen to you, but you wouldn't last long either because your blood would almost instantly fill with bubbles. That would happen before asphyxiation. But the worst part of not having an atmosphere isn't being confined to pressurized and heated suits and vehicles. It's actually the radiation. On Mars, you're exposed to too much lethal radiation. Without an atmosphere like the one we have on Earth, sunlight is enough to give you dangerous doses of ultraviolet light, X-rays, and gamma rays. Because of this, you could only survive on Mars underground. It would be an existence deprived of sunlight because it would literally kill you with ionizing radiation. And leaving your Martian burrow at night isn't an option either, because you'd also be exposed to cosmic rays that don't come from the sun, but literally from everywhere. On Earth, we have a dense atmosphere and a magnetic field that protect us from both solar and cosmic radiation. But Mars doesn't. Its atmosphere practically doesn't exist, and it doesn't have an active core that generates a magnetic field like Earth's. But as if this weren't enough, there's another problem. Mars is smaller than Earth. This is obvious if you compare their sizes. Mars has half the diameter of Earth, but what's not so obvious is that it's much less dense. It has only 11% of Earth's mass, which means that the surface gravity is 38% of what we have here. This means that on Mars, anyone can slam dunk. Okay, that's a good point, but we also have to say that your bones will lose a lot of density. And a round trip, because I assume you want to return to Earth, requires you to stay on Mars for 2 years to wait for the optimal return window. This is due to orbital mechanics. If you returned before those 2 years, you'd actually take longer to reach Earth. So, during those 2 years on Mars, you need to exercise a lot inside your mouse burrow to not lose so much density in your bones and return with osteoporosis. This would be a problem on a quick 2.5-year trip, but it's something that would make a permanent colony impossible. Our cardiovascular system is designed to function with Earth's gravity, not Mars. It's curious, isn't it? How everything on Earth, from the magnetic field, the composition and density of the atmosphere, gravity, temperature, and abundance of water and food, are all things that help keep us alive. We're designed to exist on Earth, and absolutely everything on Mars is problematic. It's clear that Mars doesn't want us there. The place on Earth most similar to Mars isn't this, it's this, Antarctica. And even so, it's 1,000 times more welcoming than Mars. But spending a season there isn't easy. The low temperatures and lack of sunlight, which would be similar to what you'd experience in an underground habitat on Mars, wear down the scientists living in Antarctic bases, who suffer from a condition called polar T3 syndrome, which is a reduction in thyroid hormones that causes memory loss, cognitive deficit, and bipolarity. That's why they always have a lot of alcohol, and nobody stays for more than 6 months. Antarctica is the only land surface where countries have peacefully agreed that it belongs to everyone. Exactly, because there's nothing there worth fighting over, and the same goes for Mars. There's no reason to go, especially considering how prohibitively expensive it would be to send a crew there, who would have a terrible time and serve no purpose. Okay, now we know why we won't go, but why do they make plans to go? Well, first, the Mars One initiative, where volunteers from all over the world offered to be the first to colonize Mars, was basically a scam, something similar to the linear city that Saudi Arabia plans to build. They use publicity to get money from people who believe it. SpaceX, on the other hand, doesn't do it to scam people because it's a pretty successful space company, but it does do it to impress investors, make them feel like they're part of something bigger than just sending cargo into space and filling low Earth orbit with Starlink satellites. And NASA does it for a similar reason. With each new administration, plans change and budgets are adjusted. It's in NASA's interest to keep people interested in space so that Congress approves the budget it needs. A large and ambitious mission like Artemis is what maintains people's interest to secure the necessary funds for other, less flashy scientific missions that on their own wouldn't get funding from Congress because they don't excite people, but are important and necessary for generating knowledge. If NASA asks Congress for a budget to go to Mars, it knows that it will at least have enough money to go to the moon. It's like haggling, you see. That's how it is. If someone tells you we're going to Mars, that we'll colonize it, terraform it, or even that it will be our lifeboat if something happens to Earth, that person is misinformed, delusional, out of touch with reality, or is lying to you because they want you to invest in their space company. Earth is the only place that does everything possible to keep us alive, and besides, it's very beautiful. We should appreciate that.